There's a hairline crack in the wood of my counter, right where the register sits, shaped almost like a lightning bolt. I never sanded it out. People ask why. I used to just shrug. Now I know exactly why. And it isn't the kind of thing you explain to a stranger buying a chainsaw chain. I run a small engine shop on the edge of Millbrook, Vermont. Mowers, chainsaws, generators, the occasional snowblower that's outlived 3 owners. It isn't glamorous work. My hands smell like 2-stroke oil more often than not, and I've given up trying to get it out from under my nails. I like it that way. Machines are honest. You take them apart, you find what's broken, you fix it, and it runs again. People aren't that simple. I learned that the hard way, a long time before Dana Whitfield ever walked through my door with a broken chainsaw and 4 kids waiting in a minivan outside. She looked at that crack in my counter before she looked at me. Then she said the thing that should have scared me off for good. I told her it didn't. She didn't believe me. Took her the better part of a year to understand I meant it. I'm 34 now. Back then I was 33, and I'd been alone in that shop for 6 years. Ever since the accident that took my dad and left me the building, the tools, and a debt I was still climbing out from under. I told myself I liked it that way too. A man can tell himself a lot of things in an empty shop after closing. I didn't know yet that the loneliest room in my life was about to get loud in the best way I'd ever known. My name is Caleb Reyes. This is how 4 kids and 1 very tired, very brave woman taught me what the word enough actually means. I grew up 2 towns over, in a house where my father kept every engine he ever fixed, running 20 years past its warranty, out of stubbornness more than thrift. He taught me the trade before he taught me much else. How to listen to a motor the way other men listen to weather. How to know trouble by sound before you ever see smoke. When he died, the shop became mine by default. I kept his name stenciled on the window glass under my own. Reyes & Son Small Engine Repair. Nobody ever asked where the son went. I was standing right there. The wound I carried wasn't loud. It was quieter than that, and harder to point to. 6 years earlier, I'd been engaged to a woman named Priya, and 3 weeks before the wedding she told me, gently, the way people tell you things they've already decided, that she couldn't marry a man who'd spent his whole life smelling like a garage in a town that would never grow past 4,000 people. She wasn't cruel about it. That almost made it worse. She just wanted more than Millbrook could give her, and I understood. And I still went home that night and sat on my father's old workbench stool until 2 in the morning without turning on a single light. After that, I stopped expecting anyone to stay. Not out of bitterness. I want to be clear about that, because bitterness was never really in me, but out of a kind of quiet arithmetic. I did the math on myself. Small-town mechanic, modest income, a shop that ate every spare dollar I had, and by then I'd started keeping to myself so thoroughly that most folks in Millbrook knew me as the Reyes boy who fixes things and not much else. I went to church on Sundays, and the diner on Tuesdays, and otherwise I kept my head down and my hands busy. It was a small life. I'd made peace with it being a small life. I dated a little, here and there, over those 6 years. Nothing took. I told myself that was fine. A man gets used to the sound of his own footsteps in an empty apartment above his shop. He tells himself that's just what it is to be 33 and unremarkable in a town where nothing ever really changes. Then, on a gray Tuesday in October, a woman I'd never met walked into my shop carrying a chainsaw that had thrown its chain, with 4 kids trailing behind her like ducklings, and everything I thought I knew about the shape of my life quietly, permanently, rearranged itself. She came in around 4 in the afternoon, right as the light was starting to go thin and gold through my front windows. I remember the bell over the door, and I remember that she had sawdust on her jacket sleeve, and a look on her face like she'd already had a long week, and it was only Tuesday. "Somebody said you're the only one in town who won't rip me off," she said, setting the chainsaw down on my counter like it weighed nothing, though I could see her arm shake slightly after she let go of it. "Depends who you ask," I said. "What'd it do to you?" "Threw the chain twice in an hour. I've got 3 cords of wood to split before the ground freezes, and a wood stove that's the only heat in my house. Behind her, the bell rang again, and 4 kids filed in. A girl who looked about 11, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been more than 4, and 2 more boys in between, maybe 7 and 9, already arguing quietly about something involving a candy bar. They arranged themselves along my wall of tractor parts like they'd done this before. Like waiting in strange places had become a skill they'd all picked up together. "They're with me," she said, unnecessary, since it was obvious. "I'm Dana. Whitfield, we're out on Coble Road, the old Pruitt place." I knew the house. Everybody in Millbrook knew the house. A farmhouse that had sat half-empty for years after old man Pruitt passed, until somebody finally bought it the spring before. I hadn't put together that the somebody was a woman alone with 4 kids, chopping her own wood before the ground froze. "Caleb," I said. "Let me look at it." I laid the saw open on my bench right there, in front of her, because some instinct told me she'd trust the fix more if she watched it happen instead of hearing about it later. The chain guide was bent. Nothing dramatic. 20 minutes of work if I did it right. While I worked, the kids drifted closer, one by one, until the youngest, the 4-year-old, whose name turned out to be Sam, was standing at my elbow watching the gears with a seriousness that made me want to laugh, and didn't. Because I could tell he'd take it as mockery. "You always fix things?" the girl asked. Her name was Ruthie. I'd learn later she was the oldest of the 4 and carried herself like she'd been quietly deputized as her mother's second-in-command somewhere along the way. "Mostly," I said. "Machines, anyway. Can you fix a house that's cold?" I looked up at that. Dana's jaw had gone tight. The particular tightness of a parent who's about to redirect a child away from an honest question that's landed somewhere uncomfortable. "Ruthie," she said. "It's all right," I said. And I meant it. Sometimes, if it's the stove that's cold and not the whole house. "It's the whole house," Sam said matter-of-factly, and Dana closed her eyes for half a second, in the particular way of a mother absorbing one more small humiliation on a long list of them, and something in my chest went sideways in a direction I didn't have a name for yet. I finished the chain. I didn't charge her for the guide, told her it was a small part, which was true enough, though the labor should have been $40 I never asked for. She noticed. She always noticed things like that. I'd learned that about her too, eventually, that she kept a private ledger of every kindness anyone showed her, because she'd learned the hard way not to expect them. "Thank you," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, not the polite thank you of a stranger, but the tired, real gratitude of someone who'd been doing everything alone for longer than she wanted anyone to know. "I mean it. Anytime the chain throws," I said. "Come by." She looked at me a second too long before she herded the kids back out to the minivan, and I stood at my window and watched them go. 4 small heads and 1 tired, straight-backed woman. And I thought, not for the first time, but for the first time in years that it actually mattered, that my shop had never once felt this quiet before. She came back 2 weeks later. Not for the saw. For a snowblower that didn't need much more than a spark plug, which I suspected even before I looked at it, and I suspect she suspected too. And neither one of us said so. That became the shape of that autumn. Something small would need fixing, a bicycle chain, a lawnmower that should have been retired 2 winters back, a wobbling porch step that had nothing to do with engines at all, but that I fixed anyway on a Saturday afternoon, because Ruthie mentioned it in passing, and I found myself driving out to Coble Road with a toolbox before I'd fully decided to. Dana would bring the kids, or some of them, or she'd come alone while they were at school and we'd talk while I worked. Not about anything large. The weather. The kids' teachers. The particular stubbornness of a '98 Cub cadet. I learned her pieces slowly. The way you learn a house by walking through it in the dark, carefully, one hand out, trusting your feet more than your eyes. She'd been married once, to a man named Rick, who'd been gone 2 years now. Not dead, just gone. The way some men go when 4 kids starts to feel like a life sentence instead of a family. He'd left a stack of unpaid bills and a note that Dana never told me the contents of, and I never asked. She'd moved them all out to the Pruitt place because it was cheap, and because her older brother Marcus had talked her into it, promising to help fix it up. A promise that had mostly evaporated once the paperwork was signed. "He means well," she told me once, out on her porch, watching Sam chase a barn cat across the yard. "Marcus. He worries. He's been worrying about me since I was 17. Sometimes I think he forgot I grew up." "What's he worry about?" She was quiet a second. "Everything. Money, mostly. And that She stopped. "That I'll let the wrong kind of man in again." After Rick. I didn't ask what the wrong kind of man looked like. I had a guess, and the guess made my chest ache in a way I didn't examine too closely. What I noticed, over those slow burn weeks, wasn't any one dramatic thing. It was the small stack of them. It was Ruthie starting to leave her jacket on my shop's coat hook without asking, like she'd decided the place was safe enough to claim a corner of. It was Sam learning my name properly instead of calling me the fix man, and then, one Tuesday, calling me Cal without anybody teaching him to, the way kids shorten a name once they've decided you belong to them a little. It was the middle two boys, Theo and Wyatt, dragging a broken bicycle into my shop on a Thursday afternoon completely unprompted, clearly having decided on their own that this was simply where broken things went now, and that I was simply the one who made them work again. And it was Dana. It was the particular quality of quiet that settled over her, sitting on an overturned bucket in my shop doorway with a coffee I'd poured her, watching her kids underfoot, that I began to recognize as something closer to rest than I'd ever seen in her before. I found myself listening for her van in the gravel lot the way I used to listen for engine trouble. Some part of my ear permanently tuned to it, whether I wanted it to be or not. One evening in November, after the kids had gone quiet in the back seat and Dana had lingered a minute too long by my counter, not leaving, not quite staying, she ran her fingers along that crack in the wood, the lightning bolt one, and asked, "Why don't you fix this?" "Never got around to it," I said. Which wasn't a lie, exactly. Though it also wasn't the truth. The truth was that crack had been there since before my father died, and some part of me had decided, without deciding, that fixing it would mean erasing something. She looked at me a beat longer than the question required. "You're a strange man, Caleb Reyes." "So I've been told." "I don't mean it bad," she said. And there was something underneath her voice I hadn't heard from her before. Something careful, like she was setting a plate down without wanting it to clatter. I mean, most men I've met would have fixed that crack the first week, just to prove the place was theirs and everything in it was under control. You just leave it be. Like you're not trying to prove anything to anybody. "Maybe I'm not," I said. She smiled, small and real, and got back in her van, and I stood in my doorway a long time after her taillights disappeared down Coble Road, turning that conversation over like a part I couldn't yet identify the function of. Around the middle of that winter, something shifted, and it shifted quietly. The way real trouble usually does. Not with a slammed door, but with an absence. Dana stopped bringing the kids by as often. When she did come in, she was distracted, checking her phone, cutting our conversations shorter than she used to. I told myself it was the season. December is hard on everybody. Harder on a woman raising 4 kids alone on what I guessed was a thin budget stretched thinner by the holidays. But there was something else in her face. Something guarded that hadn't been there in November, and it took me 2 weeks of noticing it before I finally asked. "Everything all right out at the house?" She was quiet a long moment, turning a spark plug over in her hand like she was deciding how much of the truth to hand me. "Marcus came by," she finally said. "My brother. He's been asking questions. About you. About us coming around here so much." "What kind of questions?" "The kind where he already thinks he knows the answer." She set the spark plug down. He said. She stopped herself, then made herself finish it, the way you make yourself pull a splinter instead of leaving it to fester. He said I'm setting myself up to get hurt again, that no man really wants to take on somebody else's 4 kids, Not really. Not once it stops being convenient. That eventually you'll get tired of it. The way Rick did. And it'll be worse this time because the kids are older and they'll remember it. Something cold moved through me. Hearing that. Not because it was cruel. It wasn't. Not really. It was fear, dressed up as caution. The kind only a person who loves you can inflict. But because I understood, with sudden clarity, how much weight that fear must be carrying for her, every single day. Alone. What did you tell him? I told him he didn't know what he was talking about. She looked up at me. But Caleb, I've been divorced 2 years. I've watched men be kind to my kids right up until the moment it costs them something. I don't think you're like that. I don't. But I've thought that before, about someone else. And I was wrong, and I have 4 kids who'd pay for it if I'm wrong again. I understood, in that moment, that I was standing at the edge of something, and that whatever I said next would either close a door or open one, and there wouldn't be an easy walking it back after either way. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Not because I've decided to be noble about it. Because I look forward to that bell over my door ringing more than I've looked forward to anything in 6 years. Because your kids fixed a bicycle in my shop without asking permission. Like they already knew they had a claim on the place. Because I like who I am when your family's underfoot. That's not charity, Dana. That's not me being patient with something inconvenient. That's just what's true. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she nodded, once like she was filing the words away somewhere she could return to them later. And she left without either of us saying anything more. And I understood that the conversation wasn't over. It had only opened a door that Marcus was determined to keep shutting. The confrontation, when it came in my own shop, on a Saturday afternoon in late January, with 3 inches of new snow on the ground and Dana out at the grocery store. Unaware, Marcus Whitfield was a big man, broad through the shoulders the way men get from actual labor rather than a gym, and he came through my door with the particular controlled anger of someone who'd rehearsed what he planned to say and intended to say every word of it. "You're Caleb," he said. "Not a question. I am. I'm Dana's brother." He looked around my shop, the tools, the counter, the crack in the wood, like he was cataloging evidence for a case he'd already decided the verdict of. "I want you to hear this from me instead of finding out the hard way. My sister's been through enough. She doesn't need a mechanic from Millbrook getting her hopes up and then deciding, 6 months from now, a year from now, that 4 kids is more than he bargained for. It happens. Caleb, it happens more than you'd think. And when it happens to a woman who's already been left once, it doesn't just break her. It breaks 4 kids who are old enough now to know exactly what's going on." "I hear you," I said, and I meant it. Because underneath the anger I could hear something else. A man who'd watched his sister get hurt and hadn't been able to stop it, and had decided the only power left to him was to try to stop it happening twice. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're a single guy with a shop that barely turns a profit, taking on a woman with 4 kids like it's nothing. Like it's simple. It's not simple. It's a lifetime, Caleb. It's braces and college, and every single school play and every fever at 2 in the morning for kids that aren't yours. Most men say they're ready for that. Most men aren't. I set down the wrench I'd been holding. "You're right that it's not simple," I said. "You're right it's a lifetime. But you're wrong that I haven't thought about exactly what that means. I've watched Ruthie leave her jacket on my coat hook like she trusts this place is safe. I've watched Sam learn to say my name like I already belong to him a little. I've fixed a porch step nobody asked me to fix because it mattered to your niece that it wobbled. I'm not stumbling into this not knowing what it costs. I've been doing the math since October. Same as you have. I just came out with a different answer." Marcus was quiet a moment, something in his face shifting. Just slightly. Not surrender. Not yet. But the particular loosening of a man who's heard something he didn't expect and doesn't have a rehearsed line ready for. "Our dad left when we were kids," he said finally, quieter now. "I was 12. Dana was 9. I watched what it did to her, watching a door close and knowing it wasn't coming back open. I swore I'd never let that happen to her again if I could help it. That's what this is. It's not about you specifically. It's about every door I couldn't hold shut before. I understand that, I said. I can't promise you I'll never make a mistake, Marcus. I can promise you I'm not the kind of man who walks out a door because it got hard. I've had 6 years alone in this shop to think about what kind of man I want to be if I ever got the chance to be more than that. I don't intend to waste the chance proving your fear right. He looked at me a long moment, and then he looked at that crack in my counter. The lightning bolt one, like he was reading something into it he couldn't quite name. She doesn't know I came here, he said. I won't tell her, if that's what you're asking. It's not. He almost smiled, tired around the edges. I think I want her to hear it from you anyway. Whatever it is you just told me. Dana found out about Marcus's visit 2 days later, from Ruthie, who'd overheard her uncle mention it on the phone and, being 11 and increasingly convinced she was the family's chief diplomat, decided the information needed distributing. She came to my shop that evening after closing, snow still falling outside, and she didn't say hello first. She said, "You should have told me." I was going to. When? After my brother decided for me what I could or couldn't handle? No, I said. Tonight. I was planning on driving out to your place tonight, actually. Because I've had 2 days to figure out how to say what I wanted to say, and I think I finally got it right. She crossed her arms, waiting, and there was something fragile underneath the anger. Something that told me the anger itself was a kind of armor she'd learned to put on fast, before the disappointment could land first. Your brother's scared for you, I said. He told me about your dad. About the door that didn't come back open. And I understand that fear, Dana. I do. But I need you to hear something from me directly, not filtered through Ruthie's telephone game. Or your brother's worry. You told me once you've watched men be kind right up until it costs them something. I need you to know, I've already paid the cost. I paid it the day I decided I'd rather have your noisy, complicated, 4-kid life ringing that bell over my door than one more quiet evening alone, with an empty shop, and a debt I've stopped resenting. Because at least it's mine. I'm not weighing whether this is worth it anymore. I already weighed it. It's worth it. It was worth it the first Tuesday you walked in here with a busted chainsaw, and a kid who called me Cal before I'd even earned it. She was quiet, and for one long moment I genuinely didn't know which way the silence would break. 4 kids scare every man away eventually, she said finally, low. Like she was testing the words one more time before she let them go for good. That's what I told myself for 2 years. That's the sentence I built the whole rest of my life around, so I wouldn't get hurt hoping for something different. Then none of them were worth staying for, I said. And I meant every word of it as plainly as I'd ever meant anything in my life. Because your kids aren't a cost, Dana. They're not a burden I'm agreeing to carry. Ruthie left her jacket on my hook because some part of her already decided this was a safe place. Sam calls me Cal like I already belong to him. I don't want a version of my life that doesn't have that bell ringing in it anymore. I don't want quiet. I've had 6 years of quiet, and I know exactly what it costs, too. She crossed the shop floor and I met her halfway, and there wasn't a dramatic kiss or a sweeping gesture, just her forehead against my shoulder for a long, still moment, and my hand finding the back of her head, and both of us breathing like people who'd been holding something heavy for a very long time, and had just finally been allowed to set it down. Okay, she said, muffled against my shirt. Okay, that was all. It was enough. Marcus came around slowly, the way careful men do, not with an apology exactly, but with actions that stood in for one. He started showing up on Saturdays to help split wood, working alongside me without much conversation at first. The two of us falling into the easy rhythm of men who'd decided to trust each other by degrees instead of all at once. By spring, he was calling me by name without the edge in it. By summer, he'd started bringing his own kids around to play with Dana's, and I understood that whatever door he'd been guarding all those years had finally, quietly, been allowed to stay open. We married in September, out behind the farmhouse on Coble Road, with Ruthie as maid of honor in a dress she'd picked out herself and taken far too seriously, and Sam as ring bearer, who dropped the rings twice and announced both times, unbothered, that he'd found them. Theo and Wyatt stood up with me. Two solemn small groomsmen in bow ties they kept adjusting. Marcus walked Dana down the aisle in place of the father who'd left decades before, and when he handed her hand to mine, he held my grip a second longer than a handshake required, and I understood it as the closest thing to a blessing the man was ever going to give out loud. I fixed that crack in the counter, finally, the spring after we married, sanded it smooth, refinished the whole surface, and Dana asked me why after all that time of leaving it alone. Because it doesn't mean the same thing anymore, I told her. It used to remind me of everything that was broken and staying broken. Now I've got 4 kids who leave their jackets on my coat hook, and a wife who calls this place ours instead of mine. I don't need the crack to remember what empty felt like. I've got enough reminders now of what's on the other side of it. She kissed me, right there over the sanded smooth wood, with Sam yelling something from the back room about a bicycle chain that needed fixing, and Ruthie rolling her eyes at both of us with the particular fondness of a kid who'd finally stopped bracing for the next disappointment. Some love stories start with fireworks. Ours started with a broken chainsaw, a bent chain guide, and a woman brave enough to walk into a stranger's shop with 4 kids in tow, and let herself hope, just a little, that this time the door might actually stay open. It did. It still does. Every single day that bell rings over it, and I still listen for the sound of her van in the gravel, the same way I used to listen for trouble in an engine, except now what I'm listening for isn't trouble at all. It's just my whole loud, complicated, wonderful life coming home.